Hi, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different with this one. In previous videos, I've been going through the process of start to finish, the initial illustration all the way to the final colored piece. With this one, I want to break down one of the steps a little bit more, put a bit more focus onto one of the steps, and that's specifically how I assemble the line art in Photoshop and set up various layers for special effects. I've been using Photoshop professionally since 1997, and back then we didn't have that kind of horsepower that we do today. You tend to want to make the file sizes a lot smaller and limit the number of special effects you did and limit how they were used. It's not quite as much of an issue anymore. So the method I've been using lately is a lot more RAM intensive. It's a lot more memory intensive, but I do really like the results. So for this particular piece, it's this image of this particular demon in an industrial facility, and I want to separate the background a bit more from her. My idea is to give you a bit more depth, a bit more of a foggy industrial feeling with a bit of a green glow coming from below. Primarily the color scheme I'm thinking of this will actually be my usual red blue color scheme, but I want to put in a third color. I want to put in this green coming from below, giving it a bit of an eerie feeling. I want most of that glow to only being affecting the line art behind her. And in fact, I may create I think I'm going to create basically 3 layers, consisting of the deep background, kind of middle ground, and then the foreground, the main character. And that way I can have different special effects affect each of those differently. The original illustration was done with traditional inks on 11 by 17 inch Strathmore 100-pound smooth surface paper. I was using a Speedball lettering pen for inking this one. Once it was completed, I scanned the image at full size. So this is an 11 by 17 inch image at 1200 DPI. Now for print, ultimately everything I do, I still have the mindset of doing everything for print, needs to be a minimum of 300 DPI, 300 dots per inch. 1200 DPI gives you tons of room for being able to resize the image, make it a lot bigger, capture a lot of tight detail. Now, I generally don't paint at 1200 DPI, however. I much prefer painting at 600. It's a little bit easier to work with. It still creates an incredibly detailed image. It will still resize very well with extremely little distortion. So what I'm going to do then is I've already set up a file here, this Wrath color working PSD file. That is already sized to what I want. That's at 600 DPI. It is at 11 by 17 with a slight border around it. So basically, I'm just going to copy my original artwork and drop it into a channel on that new file. Control A to select the entire canvas and Control C to copy. Go to my Wrath color working file, and I have this black sketch channel already set up. So I can just Control V, and you can see that the image is a whole lot smaller there. Use the free transform tool. So Control T to resize the image inside of this larger piece. Now, actually, it looks like the canvas I'm using is a little bit, just a slightly different aspect ratio, but this will work. I also I pre-added a border in this file, so I get a nice thick black border. That way, when I go to have it printed, I can tell them to print it precisely at 11 by 17, and basically tell them to print it as is, so they can just take it, because it will actually put a thin white border around it usually for most print shops. but because I put in a thicker black border, it still won't affect any of the line art. Okay, so I've got it roughly where I want it to be. Hit enter and turn the eyeball back onto the background, onto the RGB, and you can see there's now a thick black line all the way around the entire image. That's good. That is on a layer. It's this border layer I have sitting right here. It's actually set to multiply. Basically, it just takes the artwork that the line art and adds it to the color values below. It doesn't replace it with black. It actually adds to it, showing up as a lighter gray because the color of that channel is actually just set to a lighter gray, just so it's easy for me to see and so I can work with it. All right, now that that is in place, hit Control D, so I'm no longer selecting it anymore. Quickly save this file. Now, if I was to print this right now, all it would print would be this black border with the great big white interior. This is why I work with channels. Think of them as it is line art sitting in a Photoshop file. It does not actually print. It's like a Mylar sheet sitting on top of the artwork. I will apply it to the line art on its own separate layer. In fact, it'll be on multiple layers. My first step is to select the line art that I want to have in the furthest background. This will be furthest away from the main character. The idea for all of this is basically to constantly push focus towards the main character. As detailed as these pieces are, as much information I put into the setting, and as much as I want the setting to be its own character, essentially, it still all works in service to the main character. Basically, everything that's behind her, the post she's standing on, and this thing that is hanging from this other display. By the way, I'm painting all of this using a Huion Kamvas Pro 16 2.5K resolution screen tablet. So using my stylus right here. In Photoshop on my PC, just so we're clear on the program and the machinery that I'm using for this. So I want to separate all that line art from behind the main character and behind this secondary thing in the background. And the way I'm going to do that is using the lasso tool. So the hotkey in Photoshop is L, and turning on the quick mask, hitting Q, and now I get this extra channel called quick mask. This basically lets me save a selection as something I can physically see and keep adding to. It's just basically another channel. So using the lasso tool, I pick a shape right there, hit fill. I have the one of the buttons on my stylus set to fill. My foreground color is black, and you can now see that that section is green. If I turn off quick mask, if I hit it again and quick mask goes away, that's now just a selection that I'll be able to use later. So I need that selection, but I'll put the quick mask back on because it makes it much easier to add to the selection, to remove stuff. So I'm going to now select all the line art and going past this border, because I want the line art to go underneath the border. I want the selection to go underneath that border. But I'm just going to basically select everything around this sign and the chain that is holding the sign. The chain that's hanging from the ceiling here. So you can see right now, I have selected everything above this sign and underneath that chain. I want to continue that everywhere else. I've now selected everything outside the main character, the post she's standing on, and this extra hanging sign and corpses. So I hit Q to now turn it back into a regular selection. Make sure I'm on the black sketch. Hit copy. Create a brand new channel. I'm still going to do this all as channels. I'm going to set this channel to a different color, to make it really obvious what I'm doing, and paste. Now, right now, even though you saw me change that channel color to a magenta, it shows up as black because it's the only thing that's visible. If I turn the eyeball back on the black sketch, well, actually, let's make sure before we do that. So this is the channel that just has the background line art. Go back to the black sketch, and that's all the line art. But since I want that removed, and I've already copied it and pasted onto a different channel, I'm going to fill all that with white. So now this is on its own channel, and this is on its own channel. If I have the two overlap, you can see, because of the colors, that those are indeed two separate channels. I'll deselect because I want to create one more channel. And that second channel will take a lot less time to do. It's just this. It's just the sign and that corpse. So I'll copy that, create another new channel, and I'll create another color for it as well. Paste it in there, just like before. Go back to the original line art channel, fill with white. And now you can see that all three of those channels represent different pieces of the line art. Why did I do all that? Well, these are still on channels. Again, if I print this, it's just going to print as a great big field of white with a black border around it. That's not what I want. What I want are those three selections of black line art. I want to be able to put color layers in between them in order to do special effects. So let's go back to my layers folder here, my layers tool. Go to the background layer. Now the background layer is where I'm going to be coloring the everything behind the line art that's furthest away from the viewer. So I want to put the line art over top of that on its own separate layer. I'm going to create a new layer and label it Deep Background Line Art. Select a black, the black that I want to use, and load. Remember, this is my line art on the furthest, at the furthest back, furthest away from the viewer. So I'm going to load that as a selection. You can either drag that into this little icon here, and you can see now it's created as a selection, or when you're hovering over that particular channel, if you hold down the control button, this is in Windows, won't work the same on a Mac. Hold down the control button and tap it, tap that channel, it now has loaded that as a selection. I am now on my RGB channel, because I'm doing all this in RGB. So, and then I fill with that black that I chose. I'll deselect that. So now, if I print this, this is what it'll look like. It'll end up looking like all this line art with these great big chunks of white. That's not finished. That's not what I actually want. All the line art you can see in the background. The coloring that affects that, the coloring that goes behind that will sit on the background layer itself. But then I'm going to have another black line art layer of the sign with the hanging corpses. And I want to have a layer for color just for that section. So that will actually go on top of everything else. Right now I have this deep background line art layer. I'm going to create a brand new layer that I'm going to label Sign Colors. This is where I'm going to put in the coloring for everything behind the sign, behind the sign line art. So above that, I want to put in the sign line art. Right now, the setting for this layer is normal. I actually want to change it to multiply, either multiply or darken. This means that it will be added to the color underneath it. And this matters more for print than it does for stuff that's on the web. Basically, when you're printing multiple plates, and the plates shift very slightly. If the black line art was just on it was just on the black plate and nothing underneath it, everything underneath it was white, then if that black plate shifted, you would have a white halo on the side. Now, at the resolution I'm painting at this, that it would have to shift pretty far for that to show up. But you still don't want that to happen. If I set the layer to multiply or to darken, if the plate shifts, there's still color behind it. Because it was affecting the color behind it, it'll still work just fine. Right, so the sign color layer sits above that. And so above that, I want to put the sign line art layer. And I will load up just the line art for the sign and for the corpse. Fill. And so now you can see that that line art is back into the piece again. Set that to multiply again. Quickly save. And then above that, I want a color layer to be able to color the main character and the post that she's sitting on. So create that new layer and call it Wrath and Post Colors. That way I know which one each of these is. And then above that, finally put the Wrath and Post line art. Again, load up selection, fill, and there's all my line art again. I no longer need my original illustration. So now I have it all sitting here. All of that is done. Now I've talked about special effects over these various layers. What does that actually mean? Before I get into any of the actual coloring, I'm going to demonstrate quickly what that means. If I had just put all of the line art on a single layer and I wanted to create a glow over anything on a separate layer that would affect the line art, it would look like this. Let me just, I created a special effects layer. I'm going to set it to screen. That way that layer will, whatever color, whatever painting I do on that layer will actually interact with the line art in different ways. It actually strips, if I'm painting with 100% red, it doesn't just paint red over everything. What it actually does is it strips away everything underneath that layer that isn't red. So it won't touch white, and it'll turn black into red, but it won't do anything else. So right now, all the color that's on here is black and white. There is no color in the deep background. All right, so now, again, talk about how if all of the line art was on a single layer, and I took a special effects layer and dropped it on top, grab a gradient tool and take a red color. And you can see how that line art, all of the line art is being affected by that gradient at the same time. You can also see that because I used it on screen. Remember, it's not painting red over the entire image. What it's doing is it's stripping away everything that isn't red. It's how light works, basically. But it affected all of the line art. However, if I move that layer down so it's only going over the deep background line art, you can see the line art for the sign and the corpse and the line art for the main character are not being touched at all. So this is allowing me to put in special effects layers between the layers of line art. So it's easier to separate the planes of the deep background, the middle ground, which would be in this case this particular sign, and then the main character. Now the way I'm wanting to do this is if I then add another special effects layer that I want to have affect that sign, I also want it to affect the deep background behind it. But it's going to affect them differently because there's already some color back there. Let's get into what that means. So in this case, I'm going to create another special effects layer that's going to go over top the sign line art layer. Okay, I'll set this to screen. I'll pick a different color this time. I'm going to pick a blue. Let's pick a purple. And gradient this. And you can see that that purple is affecting the black line art of the sign, of the corpse mostly, because that's where I started. But it's also affecting the colors behind that. This sets up that sense of depth, that anything in the deepest background will only be affected by colors in the deepest background. The closer it gets to the viewer, the more other effects can be thrown on top of that. Going to the deep background line art layer that's sitting over top of all this, I'm going to create a brand new layer on top of that. I'll just label it FX1. And like how I demonstrated at the beginning of this video, change it to screen and choosing a very dark green to start with. Because the idea here is I'm stripping away everything that isn't green. Just use the gradient tool to brush up to grad up from below. And now we get this misty green effect coming up from below. You know what? I'm actually going to reduce the amount of blue in that. So we're now looking at a slightly yellowy green coming up from below. You can still see a lot of the blues, even at the base, even at the lowest point of that background. You can still see some of the blues in the original painting. Most of the blues in the background from at the top of frame, at the top of the image, are still there. So that layer is pretty much done. I do want to put more of a green glow over the bottom of it. So I'm going to do the same technique that I did with the previous layers, where the color layers, sitting on top of both the color layers and the line art layer, I put a special effects layer. So label that FX2. Change that to screen. And again, let's go to a another green, looking at stripping away color. So it works to brighten up that background even more. Let's try that again. While also throwing color over the line art and the color in the middle ground. So that's actually the primary painting on her and the post completed. I can now add in some additional special effects. Now, she is metallic and there's a lot of jewelry in there, so I actually want to add very specific spot highlights. So I go back to my Wrath and Post line art layer, create a layer above that. This will be my third special effects layer. And this will just be spot highlights. I'm going to go for a very saturated red. That's going to basically just remove everything that isn't red. Using my gradient tool. Creating that glowing effect. So again, that's on screen. Went for a very pure red using the gradient tool, and it's just stripping stuff around it from below it that isn't red. So wherever it's white or very light, it doesn't affect it at all. I like to do these in separate layers so they're easier to work with. Create an additional effects layer for, set that to screen, and this will be for little spot highlights, little reflections. So I'm actually going to choose a super bright Sometimes I'll do this with white. I'm also going to add a red effects layer coming from above and to the right. So let's do the red one first. 5, set that to screen. Choose my super pure red color. And I don't want there to be a lot, because too much of it will pull away focus from the main character. But this is just to create the sense that there is this red light. Like why is everything lit red? Well, this slight red effect over the top right-hand corner indicates, yeah, there is a light up there and it's affecting everything a little bit. Do one final green. Like the red, speak from really far away. I don't want a lot of it. I've already got a lot of green in that background. So I'm brushing a little bit of it or grading a little bit over the main line art. Just softening the line art a little bit. And that is how we do that. This video was primarily about showing the special effects, how and why I separate the line art into different layers and then apply those special effects on those various layers as I go along. This is very easy to edit. If I decided later on, you know, I'd rather that was a purple glow coming from below, I can go back and change those layers individually. Or, you know, wanted to add even more brighter highlights to the main character. Thanks for hanging out, watching this slightly more focused, topic-specific illustration discussion video, and I hope to see you in the next one.